What if I told you that one man, with no college degree, changed the way we talk, work, and live? Would you believe me if I said he did it not once, but over and over again? This man was fired from the very company he started. Humiliated, doubted, told he was finished. But he came back, and didn't just win. He reinvented the future. He created products that turned computers from mysterious machines into trusted companions. He put 1,000 songs in your pocket. He turned the phone, something we once used just for calls, into a magical touchscreen window to the entire world. He once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And he meant it. This is not just the story of a tech CEO. It's the story of a dreamer, a rebel, a perfectionist, a man who pushed the limits of design, technology, and human imagination. It's the story of how one person's vision turned a dusty suburban garage into the birthplace of a global empire. How one restless spirit taught millions to dream bigger, to expect more, to demand beauty and simplicity from technology. This is the extraordinary story of Steve Jobs, the man who taught us to think differently, to stay hungry, and to stay foolish. Chapter 1: Childhood and Curiosity. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. The city was alive with jazz clubs, streetcars, and the first sparks of counterculture. But for newborn Steve, life began with uncertainty. His biological parents were both young graduate students, brilliant but scared. They felt they couldn't raise a child, and after many sleepless nights, they made the painful decision to place him for adoption. Paul and Clara Jobs stepped in. Paul was a machinist, a man who could build or fix almost anything. Clara was gentle and patient, an accountant who kept the family grounded. They brought Steve home to Mountain View, a sleepy little town surrounded by apricot orchards and dirt roads. In the spring, the air smelled sweet with blossoms. Children rode bikes down quiet streets. No one could have guessed that this peaceful place would one day be called Silicon Valley, the center of a technological revolution. Paul was a hands-on father. He spent hours in the garage, fixing engines, building furniture, repairing cars. Young Steve, barely tall enough to see the workbench, would stand on tiptoe just to watch him. Paul taught him how to hold a screwdriver, how to line up a nail just right, and he always repeated the same advice: "Whatever you build, build it right. Make it beautiful inside and out, even if nobody will see the inside." This simple rule became one of Steve's guiding principles. Years later, he would demand that even the inside of Apple's computers, the parts customers never saw, be perfectly arranged, almost like art. Unlike most kids, Steve wasn't into sports or playing outside for hours. He was curious, endlessly curious, about how things worked. He would take apart radios, kitchen appliances, even televisions. Sometimes he could put them back together, sometimes he couldn't. But he didn't mind failure. Each broken gadget was a lesson. Each spark, each burnt fuse taught him something new. By the time he was 13, Steve's curiosity had become unstoppable. He discovered that Hewlett-Packard, a local electronics company, held public lectures. So he started hanging around, listening to engineers talk about circuits and logic boards. One day, he did something bold. He looked up Bill Hewlett, the co-founder of HP, in the phone book, and called him at home. Most kids would never dare, but Steve politely asked for spare parts for a school project. Bill not only sent him the parts, he offered him a summer job on the HP assembly line. For Steve, it was life-changing. He learned that if you ask boldly, people often say yes. This lesson, to reach out, to persuade, to pull others into your vision, would later shape his entire career. In high school, Steve met Steve Wozniak, Woz for short. Woz was quiet, shy, but brilliant with electronics. He could build a working computer from a handful of parts, almost for fun. The two Steves became inseparable. They spent long nights talking about gadgets, pulling harmless pranks, and soldering wires together. Together, they built the Blue Box, a device that let people make free long-distance phone calls. It was technically illegal, but for them, it was thrilling. It proved that two kids with some spare parts and imagination could change the rules. In 1972, Steve enrolled at Reed College in Oregon. His parents had saved for years to afford the tuition, but it drained their savings, and Steve quickly felt out of place. The classes bored him, the dorm life didn't suit him. After just one semester, he made a radical choice. He dropped out. But he didn't leave entirely. He became a drop-in, sleeping on friends' floors, eating at Hare Krishna temples, and sneaking into the classes that truly fascinated him. One of those classes was calligraphy. He was mesmerized by the beauty of letters, by the elegance of serif and sans serif typefaces. He later recalled, "If I had never dropped in on that class, the Mac would never have had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts." At the time, it seemed like a random choice. But years later, it gave Apple computers a signature look. Fonts that felt human, friendly, even fun. This period of freedom, living with uncertainty, following curiosity, trusting his instincts, was shaping Steve Jobs into something rare. A technologist with the soul of an artist. He began to see that technology didn't have to be cold or intimidating. It could be personal. It could be beautiful. And it could change the world. That realization would soon drive Steve out of the classroom and into the real world, where a garage, a soldering iron, and a friend named Woz would change history forever. Chapter 2. Starting Apple. After dropping out of Reed College, Steve Jobs didn't rush into a traditional career. Instead, he wandered, searching for meaning, for inspiration, for a way to connect his love of technology with something deeper. He experimented with diets, became a vegetarian, and even ate only apples for weeks at a time, a habit that inspired the name of his future company. He saved money and traveled to India, seeking spiritual clarity. When he returned to California, his hair was long, his clothes were simple, and his mind was focused. He had not found every answer, but he had discovered something valuable. Simplicity matters, and stripping away what is unnecessary can reveal what truly matters. Back in the Bay Area, Steve reconnected with his old friend, Steve Wozniak. Woz had been working on a new computer board, small enough to fit on a desk, but powerful enough to run real programs. When Jobs saw it for the first time, his eyes widened. "This isn't just a gadget, Woz," he said, excitement in his voice. "This could change everything. We should sell it. We could put a computer in every home." Woz hesitated. He loved building things for fun, not profit. The idea of starting a business felt risky. But Jobs was persuasive. He painted a picture of a future where ordinary people, not just corporations or universities, would own computers. He convinced Woz that what they were holding was not just a hobby project. It was the start of a revolution. In 1976, they took the leap. Apple Computer was born, not in an office building, but in the Jobs family garage. It wasn't glamorous. The garage was dusty and cluttered, filled with old furniture, oil stains on the floor, and the faint smell of motor oil. But to Steve, it felt like a laboratory of the future. Paul Jobs, Steve's adoptive father, helped them turn the garage into a workshop. He even sold his beloved Volkswagen van to raise money for parts. Steve and Woz worked late into the night, soldering boards, testing circuits, and drinking endless cups of coffee. Their first product, the Apple one, was just a bare circuit board. No case, no keyboard, no monitor, just the brain of a computer. Steve packed a sample board into his car and drove to a local computer shop called the Byte Shop. He pitched it to the owner, Paul Terrell, with his usual intensity. To his amazement, Terrell placed an order for 50 units. Steve was ecstatic, but there was a catch. The order required them to deliver fully assembled boards, ready to run. That meant weeks of non-stop work. Steve gathered friends from the neighborhood. They turned the garage into a mini factory, assembling boards one by hand. Steve inspected every single one. "Make it beautiful inside and out," he reminded them, echoing his father's advice. Even the parts no customer would see had to be perfectly aligned. When the last Apple one was finished, Steve and Woz looked at their stack of boards with pride. They had turned an idea into something real and sold it. The Apple one made just enough money to fund their next project, the Apple II. This one was different. It had a plastic case, a built-in keyboard, and color graphics, unheard of at the time. When they unveiled the Apple II at the West Coast Computer Fair, the audience was stunned. It didn't look like a hobbyist kit. It looked like a finished product, something you might proudly place in your living room. Orders poured in. Within months, Apple was making real money. By 1980, the company went public. Apple's IPO was one of the biggest of its time, and Steve Jobs, at just 25 years old, became a millionaire overnight. He was suddenly famous, appearing on magazine covers, hailed as the boy wonder of Silicon Valley. But for Steve, the money was never the goal. "Being the richest man in the cemetery doesn't matter to me," he told friends. Going to bed at night knowing we've done something wonderful. That's what matters. Inside Apple, Steve became legendary for his relentless pursuit of excellence. He would walk barefoot through the office, challenging engineers on every detail, pushing them to make the product better. If it's not insanely great, he would say, tear it apart and start again. This obsession led to the creation of the Macintosh, a computer designed to be friendly, intuitive, even fun. In January 1984, Apple aired its iconic 1984 commercial during the Super Bowl. Millions of viewers watched as a young woman hurled a hammer through a giant screen, shattering the symbol of conformity. The message was clear. Apple was here to challenge the status quo. When Steve finally unveiled the Macintosh, he pulled off the cover, clicked a button, and let the computer speak. Hello, I am Macintosh. The audience erupted in applause. For the first time, a computer didn't feel cold or intimidating. It felt like a companion, like a friend. But success can be dangerous. And for Steve, the triumph of the Macintosh would soon give way to conflict, betrayal, and the most painful lesson of his life. Chapter 3: Failure and Lessons. Success can be intoxicating. For a few years, Apple seemed unstoppable. The Macintosh had launched with fanfare, and Steve Jobs was on magazine covers, hailed as the visionary who made computers friendly. But soon, cracks began to show. After the excitement of the Macintosh launch, reality set in. Sales slowed dramatically. The Mac was innovative, yes, but too expensive for most consumers and too limited for professionals. Inside Apple, tension grew. Steve's perfectionism, once his superpower, began to clash with managers and executives who wanted stability and predictable profits. Meetings turned heated. Engineers whispered about the Steve Jobs experience, thrilling when you impressed him, brutal when you didn't. John Scully, the man Steve had famously lured from Pepsi with the legendary line, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" was now sitting on the opposite side of the table. The disagreements became more frequent. Steve wanted bold risks and dramatic innovation. The board wanted focus and careful planning. It was a battle of vision versus caution. One pivotal boardroom meeting turned into a showdown. Steve argued passionately for his product roadmap, pacing the room, sketching ideas on the whiteboard. But one by one, the board members sided with Scully. In a devastating vote, they stripped Steve of all authority over the Macintosh division. It was a public humiliation. The charismatic co-founder of Apple, the face of the company, had just been pushed out of power. Shortly after, Steve resigned. He was only 30 years old, wealthy beyond imagination, but suddenly unemployed and adrift. It was devastating, he admitted years later. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach and couldn't breathe. But something unexpected happened. Instead of giving up, Steve started over. He founded a new company called Next, pronounced like next, meaning the next step in technology. Its mission was ambitious: to build the most powerful, most elegant computers for universities and researchers. The next computers were stunning. Matte black magnesium cases, rounded corners, beautiful design. Even the circuit boards were color-matched and perfectly arranged. But they were expensive, too expensive. Sales trickled in slowly, and many critics called Next a failure. At the same time, Steve made another bold move. He bought a small computer animation division from filmmaker George Lucas and renamed it Pixar. Pixar was a gamble. For years, it lost money. They tried selling animation hardware, made short films like Luxo Jr., and even produced commercials. But profits never came. Some friends told Steve to cut his losses, but he refused. He believed in Pixar's potential and kept writing checks year after year to keep the company alive. Then, after nearly a decade of struggle, everything changed. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated feature film. The risk paid off. Audiences everywhere fell in love with Woody and Buzz Lightyear. Critics praised it as groundbreaking, and the film became a global box office sensation. The Pixar IPO later that year turned Steve into a billionaire. But more importantly, it taught him something profound. At Pixar, Steve learned patience. He learned that great creativity takes time. He learned to trust his teams, to guide them rather than control them. These lessons, born out of failure, would shape his leadership style forever. When Steve finally returned to Apple, he came back wiser, calmer, and more focused than ever before. And just in time. Because Apple was running out of money, out of time, and out of chances. Steve was about to lead the greatest comeback in business history. Chapter 4: Return and Innovation. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in serious trouble. The company that had once been the darling of Silicon Valley was now bleeding money. Its product line had exploded into chaos. Too many models, too many accessories, and no clear vision tying them together. Competitors like Microsoft were dominating the market. Windows PCs were cheaper, faster, and everywhere. Apple's market share was shrinking month after month. Analysts predicted bankruptcy. Some even said Apple was a dead company walking. Then, in 1996, Apple made a bold decision. It bought Next, Steve Jobs' struggling computer company. With the acquisition came Steve himself. Officially, he was just an advisor, but everyone in Cupertino could feel the shift. When Steve walked back into Apple headquarters, some employees were excited, others were nervous. He was known for his intensity, for his obsession with excellence, and for his unfiltered honesty. It didn't take long for him to take control. He studied every product Apple was making and was shocked by the lack of focus. At a pivotal management meeting, Steve grabbed a marker and drew a simple 2x2 grid on the whiteboard. On one axis, he wrote Consumer and Pro. On the other, Desktop and Portable. Then he turned to the room and said, "We're going to make just 4 great products. A consumer desktop, a consumer laptop, a pro desktop, and a pro laptop. That's it." Everything else was canceled. Dozens of projects were shut down overnight. Printers, scanners, extra models, gone. Some employees were stunned, even angry. But others felt a strange relief. For the first time in years, Apple had a clear direction. Steve's leadership was intense but energizing. He would walk the halls, dropping into meetings unannounced. He asked hard questions, pushed designers and engineers to think bolder, to cut complexity, to make things simple and beautiful. He obsessed over details. He wanted computers that didn't just work, they delighted. In 1998, the first result of this new vision arrived. The iMac, bright, colorful, friendly. It looked nothing like the beige boxes that filled offices at the time. The iMac came in translucent plastic, Bondi blue, with a handle on top so you could move it easily. It said to the world, "Computers can be fun." The launch was a hit. Apple was profitable again for the first time in years, and the world began to pay attention. But Steve wasn't finished. He knew that Apple had to go beyond computers to truly thrive. In 2001, he walked on stage in his now iconic uniform, black turtleneck, jeans, sneakers, and held up a tiny white device. "1,000 songs in your pocket," he announced. It was the iPod. Sleek, simple, with a click wheel that felt like magic. No more CDs. No more carrying around cases of tapes. Your entire music library could now fit in your pocket. The iPod became a cultural phenomenon. People took them everywhere. On buses, trains, jogging trails, classrooms. White earbuds became a symbol of cool. From that moment, Apple's product launches became global events. People camped outside Apple stores for days just to be first in line. Tech journalists wrote about Steve's reality distortion field, his uncanny ability to make you believe you were witnessing history. His keynotes became theater. He would build suspense, pacing the stage, saving the biggest surprise for the end. Then he would deliver his famous line, "Oh, and one more thing." And with that, the crowd would roar, knowing something big was coming. Apple was no longer just a computer company. It was becoming a cultural icon, a lifestyle brand that inspired millions of people around the globe. Chapter 5: iPhone, iPad, and Legacy. January 2007. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The stage was dark except for a single spotlight. Steve Jobs, in his signature black turtleneck and jeans, walked slowly to the center of the stage. He paused, looked out at the audience, and began to speak. "Every once in a while," he said, "a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything." He let the words hang in the air. The audience held its breath. "Today," he continued, "Apple is going to reinvent the phone." And with a smile, he revealed the iPhone, a sleek black touchscreen device that combined a phone, a music player, and an internet communicator in one. "This is not 3 separate devices," Steve said. "This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. It was one of the most electric moments in tech history. For years, phones had physical keyboards, clunky menus, and tiny screens. But the iPhone was different. No buttons, no stylus, just a screen you could touch, tap, swipe, and pinch to zoom. It was like holding the future in your hand. Within months, lines of people camped outside Apple stores, waiting to be the first to buy one. News cameras captured scenes of customers cheering as they walked out, holding up their new iPhones like trophies. And the iPhone was just the beginning. In 2008, Apple introduced the App Store. Suddenly, developers around the world could create apps that turned the iPhone into almost anything: a flashlight, a map, a camera, a game console. Steve grinned on stage and said the phrase that became part of pop culture. "There's an app for that." The iPhone didn't just change phones. It changed how people lived, how they worked, how they connected. From ordering food to taking photos to finding love, suddenly it all happened through a device in your pocket. But Steve wasn't finished. In 2010, he stepped onto the stage again to introduce another new product: the iPad. A sleek, thin tablet that looked like a giant iPhone, but was something entirely new. "It's so much more intimate than a laptop," he said, "and so much more capable than a phone." Critics were skeptical. "Who needs a tablet?" they asked. "Isn't this just a big iPod?" But when people tried it, they were hooked. The iPad became a sensation in homes, in schools, in businesses. It turned into a new category of device, selling millions within months. Steve had once again proven that he could see what people wanted before they even knew it themselves. But behind the scenes, Steve was fighting a private battle. In 2003, he had been diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. For years, he kept working, approving product designs, leading key meetings, and guiding Apple's future, even as his health declined. By 2011, his illness had become too severe to ignore. In August, he stepped down as Apple's CEO. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "I have always said that if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know." Unfortunately, that day has come. 2 months later, on October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The world mourned. Crowds gathered outside Apple stores, leaving flowers, candles, handwritten notes, even half-eaten apples, as tributes. President Obama said, "Steve was among the greatest of American innovators, brave enough to think differently, bold enough to believe he could change the world, and talented enough to do it." Today, every iPhone, every Mac, every piece of Apple design carries a piece of Steve's spirit. Every time we swipe a screen, send a message, or listen to music on the go, we are living inside his vision. Steve's story isn't just about technology, it's about life. It's about holding on to a vision when no one else can see it. It's about falling hard, standing back up, and building something greater than before. Think about everything he faced: adoption at birth, dropping out of college, being fired from the company he created. And yet, he turned every setback into a stepping stone. What does his journey teach us? Failure can be a gift. Being fired from Apple gave him the freedom to think bigger and the chance to come back stronger. Follow your passion. Steve built products he loved, and by doing so, created things millions of people loved too. Think differently. Challenge the ordinary. Break the rules. Build something extraordinary. Never stop learning. A single calligraphy class inspired the Mac's beautiful fonts and changed digital design forever. Leave a mark. Steve once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe. Otherwise, why else even be here?" His story reminds us that one person really can change the world. One bold idea, one act of courage, one refusal to give up. So let me ask you, which part of Steve Jobs' story inspires you the most? His relentless drive for perfection, his courage to start over, his ability to see the future before anyone else? Share your thoughts in the comments and keep his spirit alive.